And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Flying weather for Sunday morning. A lot of IFR here over the eastern interior and down into the North Gulf Coast, including Prince William Sound, across the Manuska Valley, on up toward the northern, well, across the northern Susitna Valley, there into the Tanana. And North Gulf Coast IFR, Panhandle, mostly IFR. VFR just along the Alaska Range to Kodiak Island, and then good VFR for the western part of the state into the Chukchi Sea, southward to around the Pribilof Islands, with marginal VFR over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. And then for Sunday afternoon, no change out here in the west, pretty much marginal VFR all the way down, covering the entire Aleutian chain to the Alaska Peninsula. VFR in the increase here over the southwest quarter of the state, and also improving over the Copper River Basin slowly with some leftover marginal VFR over the mountainous terrain. And then northern part of the state there, marginal VFR with IFR, Brooks Range in the North Slope. Back to VFR for the Arctic coast. IFR, areas of the North Gulf Coast, areas of the northern and eastern southeast coast. And moving on to Monday morning. Here we go. IFR along the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, much of the Panhandle, and a lot of some smattering of IFR over the central and southern interior here. Basically VFR though for south central Alaska, western Cook Inlet down to the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and some marginal VFR and up here over the Seward Peninsula now to the Noatak Valley and Kobuk Valley. And then out to the west, lower conditions, batch of IFR here from Adak and Atka eastward to about Nikolsky. On Alaska Island at this point for the morning hours, that'll be VFR, but some of that IFR slides on in during the afternoon hours, extending back to Atka, north across the Pribilofs, now up to Nunivak Island. VFR, southern and western part of the state. Some lower conditions up here to the northeast, with the Arctic coast looking pretty good. And for Monday afternoon, northern Panhandle IFR over toward Yakutat, improving as you head south, becoming VFR down toward Misty Fjords, Ketchikan, Metlakatla, in those areas. And for passes for tomorrow, Brooks Range, Anatuvik and Adigan, occasional IFR for both passes. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR, and also VFR for Rainy. Windy, marginal VFR, marginal for Isabel, and Mintasta starting out IFR, becoming marginal during the day. And for Tanita, also looking for improvement with the lower conditions early on, otherwise marginal VFR into the afternoon. Portage, occasional IFR the entire day for Sunday, as well as Chilkoot and White. Freezing levels at the surface, still down south of the Alaska Peninsula, and just south of Adak and Atka, and then up along the North Gulf Coast for tomorrow morning, along with 2,000 feet right along the North Gulf Coast over toward Resurrection Bay, and then up to 8,000 feet down over the southern Panhandle. And icing, flow of moisture coming northward, carrying areas of isolated moderate rime icing here as moisture increases up toward the Brooks Range in the North Slope, even reaching the eastern Arctic coast westward here, in toward Kotzebue Sound and Buckland, maybe Shishmaref. And then the heavier icing will be along the North Gulf Coast from about Yakutat into Prince William Sound and southward. And the jet stream here, 90 knot southwest winds into the Queen Charlotte's, about 80 knots south-southwesterlies for the Panhandle, 70 knots southerlies. You can see south winds now, south-southwest winds. Jet stream level here covering much of the interior, all the way up to the Arctic coast now. And low pressure over the northern Bering Sea with westerlies only at about 90 knots here across the eastern Aleutians. 9,000 feet south to north flow in the central interior up to 45 knots, turning east at about 40 to 45 knots for the western Arctic coast. Not too bad over the Bering Sea here with general trough of low pressure, light westerlies there for the Alaska Peninsula, and southwest 35 to 45 knots for the southeast coast. And for 3,000 feet, much lighter winds here at this elevation for the Panhandle, picking up a little bit there along the central and north coast. Southeast 45 knots along the North Gulf Coast, And then easterlies 45 to 60 knots there for the Arctic coast, North Slope. And the strongest winds there, again, on the western Arctic coast, pretty light here over the central and eastern Bering Sea. And southeast winds, or east-southeast, 40 to 45 knots along the Aleutians east of Nikolsky. And turbulence-wise, look for moderate turbulence from Adak out to Shimianatu, and also some moderate turbulence likely there for the western Arctic coast, Point Ley down to Point Hope. Central interior here looks like roughly the Koyukuk Valley area, as well as the North Gulf Coast.